So, I think I'm going to start doing these kind of talks because on my walks, while I'm kind of going through my own health journey, I think it's coming to an end. I believe it's coming to an end. I believe through all my effort, I have discovered a few rules that seem to apply when dealing with at least my issue, disease, infection, whatever you want to label it as. And that's kind of the reason why what I was just thinking about was how we use definitions and understand its impact on our lives, the societal impact, the legal impact. Like, there's a huge impact on how we agree definitions of words or words are used. For instance, being poisoned, does it, like, if you're poisoned, we all know the common kind of definition of that. Like, if you're bitten by a poisonous animal, if you take a poisonous drug, like rat poison or cyanide or whatever else. But ultimately, being poisoned in its application in the real world is to know how to treat some type of effect. And when you treat any effect, you must know the cause, which is why a word matters, like being poisoned. To a poison control specialist, it fits a certain criteria. And that criteria would be found through their tests. So, you can say you take something and it has a negative impact on you in the long term. Maybe it leads to even cancer. Like, we find pesticides and stuff, like Roundup or whatever, causes cancer, and then we sue the manufacturer, and then they don't sell that anymore or include that ingredient in whatever they're making. Like American cereal, the same cereal sold in Europe doesn't include certain ingredients because the EU banned it. So let's take that example. America continues to sell those ingredients in the cereal to children in the USA. Those chemicals or whatever they're putting in there that are banned in the EU. So are the manufacturers and everybody who's profiting from selling this cereal that has those things banned in the US, are they poisoning our children? By definition, no. Because by definition, if they were, they would not be able to sell it. The government wouldn't allow it. But by definition, I don't know if the EU would say, if you sell those ingredients through false labeling or whatever, or deceive our consumers and they're eating it somehow and bypassing that law of not selling it, would they say, if caught, you poisoned our people, the Europeans who bought it? I don't know. Because maybe that would matter. To me, the definition really matters. I think Webster's would simply say, would not be so specific. Like I mentioned, it wouldn't only say the definition of poison is what's found in the poison control test if you think that's the cause of whatever effect. I guess if like the example I use, if somebody sold the banned product in Europe anyway, like the cereal, and then it actually leads to the issue for which it was banned, like cancer or whatever, do they even know how to identify that? And if they did, would they call it then the accumulation of poison? Would they still see it as poison in the person? I think they also use maybe side effect is an interchangeable term. I think even infection. You could say you infected, and over time the infection hit the tipping point, causing cancer, whatever disease the Europeans banned it to prevent through the studies or whatever, or the result over time. However they came up with that conclusion, there's definitely a way. And I think now it's more commonly understood, at least if you, I guess it depends on your political leaning. There's a lot of people who believe the mainstream media. If you believe the mainstream media, I guess you don't believe in COVID vaccine injuries. But if you believe in COVID vaccine injuries, and you yourself, let's, just put yourself in a hypothetical even, whether or not it's happened to you, you took a vaccine or were fine, took a vaccine and had short-term side effect, long COVID, whatever. It doesn't matter. Let's use a hypothetical. You take COVID vaccine, you had an experience up until that time of living in your body. You know what has happened, that's normal, whatever. If you fall down from a 2-story building and break a bone, it's kind of like that's the effect and the cause. It's like, over your life you've learned these things. So you take, in a hypothetical situation, if you take a COVID vaccine and you develop, I guess, a side effect, listed or not, that if you go and do a Google search of COVID vaccine side effects, whichever one you got, there's probably a list out there where they say what side effects could happen. But what also happens is there is no guarantee. There aren't people out there who have a side effect or something happen after taking the vaccine that's completely new from a health viewpoint in that individual's life. That isn't a coincidence, and that issue isn't listed as a side effect. I don't know what type of symptoms that could be. And also, most side effects aren't really clear if they'll be chronic or if they'll become chronic or not. People have chronic issues. People also have those same issues or symptoms in the short term. It's called autoimmune. That's what they label it as, which is another definition I think is abused. At least in the application, it matters to people where it applies, such as if you have an autoimmune condition, there is no cure, at least recognized by modern medicine. I can't think of a single thing modern medicine has come up with to cure any autoimmune, with tests to show this is repeatable every time. They have all kind of creams, eczema creams and stuff, and they're able to sell them because in their study it showed repeatable positive results, and the side effects, I guess, weren't, killing everyone. I think that's the real side effect that matters when it comes down to a study. I'll do another video on that because I did a clinical study. But back to my point on whether you've been poisoned. Okay, you're the hypothetical situation. Now, it really doesn't matter if the side effect you get after. I say side effect because it would be a recognition of, I didn't have this issue before taking this COVID vaccine, and believing that it's not a coincidence. Because in the case of the side effect not being listed, modern medicine would say it's a coincidence. Because in their mind, all side effects are known because it's gone through a scientific process. And they, like, the difference between science and religion, both are trying to seek truth, but it's the process in which the truth, I guess, is identified and agreed upon, and the consensus or whatever. That's kind of why scientists think they have the trump card, is because through repeatable, some different people can take the same thing, repeat the process, and have the desired result. And how this affects the thinking with whether or not you're poisoned when it matters. Because when it matters is when you have a chronic issue that's not a coincidence from something you were told was safe. Especially if it were mandated. Jesus. But anyway. Because to me, I don't care how the poison control defines poison, because like I said earlier, that's the only way you can sue someone for poisoning you, by literally stating in your lawsuit that you were poisoned. And logically speaking, by the dictionary's term of being poisoned, I don't know what the dictionary's term is. I just kind of know how, what common sense is. Like, what other word would you use when you take something and it has a negative consequence on your health? Like if you eat the wrong food that has chicken with salmonella on it, You call that food poisoning. If you don't call that a food infection, I guess you could. Why not? That's why I think infection and poison are like interchangeable. I guess you could try to differentiate it, but why, when both of those words even can also be called a side effect? And like how this applies to someone trying to deal with any symptom they wish to go away. Because that's why people go to doctors in the first place. They are compelled. Sometimes people can have issues and live with them. Maybe they don't even know they have those issues. Maybe they believe those issues are not treatable and it's not that bad. But no, they could go to a doctor and try, but just prefer not to. But a side effect, an infection, a poisoning, what else? These things actually matter. Because for you to fix an issue, you have to know the cause, unless there is a test to know and explain every symptom someone would ever complain about, to show this is the cause. At the very least, test also will show if it's an infection. This is what the infection is sensitive to. This is what will kill it. Autoimmune tests, like rheumatologists will test for antibodies. So like their tests acknowledge cause and I guess can gauge severity over time to determine how a treatment's effectiveness. You know, if you got a test on your first visit, usually in the beginning things are the worst. Then you learn to manage it. Over time they get better. Oftentimes a test could validate that, if one exists, that even show an outsider outside of yourself what's going on, which actually helps as evidence if a diagnosis leads to disability. If you go on disability, only certain issues will qualify for that. I don't think there is no test to measure how bad pain actually is that exists today. No level of pain will ever get you on disability. If you have a diagnosis that also has pain in it, that will qualify you for long-term disability. I guess if I had to think about some, maybe like a back injury, or I mean, obviously if you're like an amputee or something, the test would be, I have no legs. Do you have eyes? But for a person who has a back injury, I guess maybe the test is an MRI or some type of x-ray of your spine and a doctor assessment, formal assessment, written up with the whole, diagram and everything of their findings to say, yep, this is not how a normal spine is formed or looks, and this is likely the cause of the pain they're complaining about. And that would, if you just complain of back pain, even if you have, like a police report saying you're in a car accident, that police report isn't proof, and the accident you were in isn't proof that it caused that back injury. Now, however you say the back injury is impacting your life, like you can't work, will qualify you for disability unless you have more objective truth. Maybe it's possible and it's likely harder. Maybe you have to have a lot more support from a doctor or something, and you can get disability for a back injury without anything other than your word of how bad the pain is. You have a x-ray done and it looks completely normal to a doctor, but you say you have back pain, or MRI with contrast and it looks normal to the radiologist, and they believe you may have pain or whatever. Maybe them agreeing with you, they have to write up something formally, or who knows. Maybe that's why it's like there's a process, a legal process to even go through, so a judge can figure all out those sort of variables. But I guess you have to go through all that. It makes sense for people to have to go through that and have a judge determine, because there's no definitive test. So it's like, in that sense, they acknowledge there is no definitive test, because if there was, then there would be no argument requiring really no extensive process and lawyer. It's just clear cut. You go to doctor for back injury, it shows through clear tests. Like, doctor doesn't need to hear how bad it is and what you can and cannot do. You qualify. If you want to live on disability and can't, and if that's a better alternative than powering through pain with a job you might have, if it pays more or something, who knows? Maybe it's a sacrifice. But it's funny because there is no consistency, and that's why it's probably hard for anyone to follow with what all I've already said, because my point went from being poisoned to being accepted into disability based on a test result. But then there's this complicated process to even get approved for disability, and there wouldn't be a need for a complicated process if test results were definitive. The need for a complicated process to prove you have what you say you have, that means you can't work, is because there's no definitive tests. Maybe some diagnoses are way different and not so complicated for the person if they want to get on disability. I'm just trying not to get specific with the big breakdowns in our healthcare system, because the impact it has is people are being poisoned by whatever, I know I'm not using the definition technically correct when I say that, but I have no other word, because to me, when I say people are being infected, that doesn't really, maybe that's actually happening too, but to me, poison covers all bases. If I say people are being given things and over time it's leading to different issues, that's like the same thing as saying people are being poisoned. I think the only difference is that there's different extremes, you can take when you present it one way or the other. When you say poison, it seems all negative. There's no positive in any sense of it. And I don't see any positive. I think we create new things, and then it's crazy in a capitalist world. We like to fuel our economy. And maybe, unfortunately, it's a phenomena, and there's no way around it, is the incentive behind the mass poisoning and the ease and the difficulty in regulating it. Because when they ban something, they have to bend it down to its molecular structure. And all these manufacturers do is find ways to alter the molecular structure to pretty much supply to the market the same exact thing that was already banned. Now I just entered a whole new rabbit hole. It's just like, K2 spice. It was like legal weed. They could not ban it because every time they banned it, or they thought they did, what it came down to is they were banning a molecular structure. Like, it's like chemistry. I'm not a chemist, but we went through the basics, and no, everything ultimately has a unique molecular structure we learn to synthesize and replicate in our manufacturing. That's how pharmaceuticals are made, and pesticides, which is like probably, it's crazy. But anyway, so they couldn't ban the K2, and then they just come out with a new one, keep selling it through gas stations saying don't smoke it, and then they ban the next one. I think they just gave up on it. I don't know how they are enforcing it now, but anyway, they do that with, I think, Roundup and pesticides and Teflon pans, or what is it, non-stick pans. You'll see non-stick pans. Like, this is so true. You see non-stick pans sold, and on the pen it'll say no PFOA, no some other stuff. There's like 3 of them now they ban. But I'm just telling you guys, I don't know what y'all believe. Like, at least with our technology today, if you see a non-stick pen, I don't care, because they're allowed to sell it and it says non-PFOA. The reason why they banned the PFOA or whatever and they're selling you a non-stick pan, they're going to have to eventually, it's just a matter of time, it goes through the process, the same exact process, and how the PFOA got banned for whatever the latest molecular structure is now they're using to sell the same thing, and then it'll get banned. So I guess ignorant people were buying non-stick pans. I say ignorant like you just don't know. It's not an offensive term. But if you buy a non-stick pan and you see no PFOA, you're like, oh, I'm glad this one doesn't have that. Like, whatever you think that is you're buying it now and doing that to you. And you're waiting, for 5 or 10 years or whatever for it to affect enough people to hit a tipping point that the government identifies that as the cause of the consumer's complaint, right? Like, how does that even get to that point where they're like banning anything? How many people have already been affected and they're like, no, this is the cause or whatever? Like, you want to wait for that? Because I understand that the truth is hard to know when it comes to what's healthy. They were selling margarine. I mean, they still do it to this day as a healthy alternative to butter. And vegans think they live a healthy lifestyle. Like, they believe that. Like, our definition of what's healthy can't be proven because there's no definitive testing. And if there was tests that showed much and how they help cure diseases or whatever, like, they can test for cancer and see how effective the radiation treatment is. Or even people can test for cancer and do things on their own and go back and do the same test and see their cancer has been reduced. We have no way of knowing what's causing what. And the last thing I'll say is, one thing I know about doctors and they're like, that's why I kind of like the words matter to me, is like, a doctor is probably, if they have something that can't be easily fixed that happens in their life, they probably have it the worst in terms of being closed-minded. Because most doctors, I think, have this religious belief that these drugs could not exist if they were in fact poisoning people. I mean, could you imagine? How could any Christian participate in the system if what I'm saying, like, in that regard, is at all true? I don't know. But if you are Christian and you're given a choice to kill one person to save 1,000 people, I think you would just maybe request to sacrifice yourself if that's an option, or if it's an option to just not kill that person. I don't know. God says not to kill anyone. Maybe it's a matter of timing. But if we kind of believe that the definition of poison actually should apply, then it would force the system to focus on developing accurate tests somehow. I don't know how they do it. And to kind of just be honest. And until then, like we talk about AI and all its impact on society and jobs and what is it, where everybody gets money, universal basic income, right? I think the world would be a way better place, if we're ever to try to take that sort of step. Then, because it's going to remove a lot of incentive out there, especially to take on burdens on others where there is no test to know what's going on. I just have a huge concern for the future and for the system reliance on tests, and it's working in a way like these tests, what they don't show suggests you don't have certain things by definition, like an infection or whether you've been poisoned. In most cases, I don't even think they are showing what's truly happening. And even like in the autoimmune test example, they can find antibodies and say, yes, this test result suggests what you say is true. Because somebody might go in there and say, I have, arthritis, and have a test result like a normal person. Someone who doesn't. And then they would say, that's weird because your tests don't show that. I don't know if I can help you, sir. I think they would actually probably not take it as serious and call you crazy. I'm not saying there's a lot of crazy people out there, but until there's definitive tests, you almost have to kind of believe the crazy. I mean, I don't have any other answers. Because if you don't believe the crazy and you believe the definitive tests, you could be unknowingly causing great pain to someone. And if I were ever in a situation that I caused great pain to anyone and didn't know it, I would want to know. And I would also want to make sure I don't accidentally ever do something like that again. That's why I'm saying a true Christian that believes the tests using healthcare are meaningless in a lot of cases, and I think they are. I mean, I strongly believe it based on my actual experience, unless you think I'm crazy, which, without a test saying anything as that, as evidence of what I say to support it, it's easy to think someone is crazy. But if you're a Christian doctor and you believe that the tests are not definitive, and somebody and you give someone a COVID test and they die, or a COVID vaccine and they die. Like, if that were you, would you believe you're going to hell? I guess you would never want to believe that. Even if it were true. And I think subconsciously you would be glad there is no test proving that. Especially if you were, if you just gave a fucking vaccine or any drug to anyone that kills them. But also, I don't know, it could be way worse than death. Things can be worse than death. I think that explains why people kill themselves. Death is a way out, for anyone who does that. I don't know what they're trying to escape from. It's different for everyone. It wouldn't surprise me if someone was truly poisoned by something that they thought was supposed to help them because they went to somebody who was told to help them, like a doctor. Like we all believe doctors are there to help us and they can't hurt us. And then, they can't live with that anymore. And I think that's worse. I'd rather be like given cyanide to, poison. I think, everyone who's poisoned in the non-technical sense would maybe wish they were poisoned in the technical sense. They might even prefer it, depending on how bad things get, how chronic things become. And the thing I know about the system is when you see a doctor and you don't follow up, odds are they think that they helped you. But I know when I don't go back to a doctor for a follow-up, it's because I thought the doctor offered no help. So why would I go back? I think the system works for ignorant and lazy people, and that's it. And then statistically, it's in favor of the majority. And that's how it became generally accepted. And unfortunately, there's always going to be a statistic. So that's all. Hope I taught you something.